Right, let's spin, because the transition here is obviously, like you opened it earlier, is this zonic move is crazy. Like, this is one of those moves where you wake up and you're like, what? This is the news? Because remember, the news for that one was like, it wasn't even like there was months of rumors. We just woke up and it was like, he's out. And it's definitely happening, and it's all done. And the deal, and then also, obviously, there was also extra details leaked, like maybe Vitality wanted him to take a pay cut. By the way, to be fair, I will add in, everyone is asking for pay cuts in big orgs in all esports games right now. I can tell you, in fact, if people don't know, even though I dummy on them, the reason why Evil Genius's Valorant team just won the World Championship and has to already take pay cuts is because it's just industry-wide, mate. The problem is, you can imagine some of these deals were signed like before the esports winter, and then now everyone has no money, so they know they're not going to have money for the future years. Or if you want to get a better team, if you're going to sign this player, you need to sell someone or cut everyone's salary. So what? Like, first of all, I had no anticipation of this, because actually all the messaging to me after the major looked awesome. It looked like Zonic's going to be there like 5 years, and if anything, he's going to cycle people in and out, and so this is out of nowhere for me. What are your thoughts? Because you've hinted there, like on the Falcons angle, you may be not a fan of this idea of sort of essentially it's like some rich guys coming along, just go and start buying the pieces I want, right?
Yeah, I struggle to piece that one together. I have to be real. I think I want to start the conversation by acknowledging that in the real world, money does count. And maybe we don't like to think of it. Maybe it's not a very romantic aspect, and we would all like to think that all the players have greater aspirations and all of the coaches are just in it for the love of the game. Of course they have that. But money does play a role. And now, if there is truly an incredible difference in the conditions that he was offered in the next few years, and who am I to tell him he shouldn't make that deal? Like, who am I to tell him, no, Zonic, for the love of Counter-Strike, you should refuse this offer because you're a purist? Like, hell no, that's just stupid. So I'm not aware of the details and the conditions of the deal that are happening. But as you rightfully mentioned, everyone is trying to cut cost here and there. Everyone is trying to tighten the belt just a little bit. So if he got offered a way out in a very comfortable setup, then good for you. You know what? You want to put your family in a nice place, whatever. You want to secure their future. He's got kids as well. Hey, these are all considerations that are valid. What annoyed me a little bit was the PR messaging about it makes sense in the future. We're going to have something great going on here. That is the only thing that annoyed me, which I understand to an extent. I know how you got to play the rules of the PR and all, but realistically, you had a core of at the very least 3, if not 4 players that are here to stay in Counter-Strike. Young superstar players. Even Magisk, who's at the corner, 25-year-old, still had at the very minimum 5 years ahead of him where he could be an absolute beast, which he is right now. So if you admit the possibility that Apex would not play Counter-Strike for 10 more years and he might be eventually on the way out, possible, I don't think even that's the case, but possible, you still had an incredible core of players. You could write a legacy. You have the best team in the world by the results over the year. You're moving into a new version of the Counter-Strike. You have the best player in the world. You have a strong cast. You have young players like Flames and Spinks, who are obviously not finished product. They could be even better than what they are now. Don't tell me you changed because the project makes more sense. I don't take it.
Yes.
That's my only problem that I have. I'm not here to judge whether he followed other priorities. Everyone is entitled to live their life.
Just the reasoning given, basically.
That to me is the only thing. You could even have a strong team put together, but don't tell me there's a guarantee that this is going to be better than what you have now.
Yes. No, I'm with you. The messaging definitely is some bollocks on both sides. That's the worst part on both sides. Because first of all, like you say, if you're Zonic, like, mate, even though you might be the greatest coach ever, I'm just going to say this. Until this Vitality lineup got it together now, forget, like, even the Pro League win last year with Spinks, no one really got that hyped off. Until you got this Rio into the major win now, and then now you also showed us Flames at Emega, no one actually was going to give you full marks for this Vitality project. It actually would have been Zonic's graveyard if he didn't ever win the major and all that stuff. Like, people would have said he failed and didn't do it. Now that you've done it, right, you're actually at your absolute peak value in theory. So I get why if you're Zonic, you might feel like, hey, I'm on top of the world. But like, you should actually have seen from the Vitality project where, as you say, you had the best player in the world. It's still really hard to get a number one team in Counter-Strike. Like, when you have one, you don't fucking let it go. You don't say, oh, well, I'll start again, because like this is an even worse version of what we talk about with Cadian. It's like, first of all, there is nowhere else to go. Even if I go to another team, I can only make them as good as Vitality was number one in the world. Like, you're probably not getting a better team. And that, quite frankly, I mean, we can segue into this in a second, you're probably getting a much worse team no matter who you sign. Because that's the other thing. People are thinking, they've got all this money. You notice there's no names signed yet, though, guys. It's all just rumours. And I'll tell you what, right now, I'll talk about this in a second, because I'm actually going to tie it to that Cloud9 project Henry G did. I can tell you from behind the scenes, trying to make teams like that, no matter how much money you have, Maniac, is a nightmare. It's really hard because it's like every off-season. Nico's not just going to join when there's no other players. He's going to join if you get player X and player Y he likes. But then player Y isn't joining until Nico joins. And then if he joins, do we have the IGL? And then what? And then, by the way, God forbid you even do sign like 3 really good players, but then, you have to skimp on the last one. And then that's just an open. Like, there's so many ways this can go badly. So what I'll say first of all is this. On the actual Vitality side, again, we're having to speculate, so I'm going to have to do it like I did with Heroic. Quite frankly, my speculation on the Vitality one, in light of the fact this news leaked out, that sounds like he just wanted it to come out, by the way, leaked out about the salary. My vibe is that it was Vitality's choice. That essentially Vitality sort of were like, here's what we're going to offer you as a renegotiation. And I take it as like, zonic potentially took that as insulting. Now, there's 2 ways I can go on this. One is on the Vitality side, even though I'm going to conclude that I think they're wrong, I actually think there are cynical reasons as to why they might think they can let Zonic go, Maniac. And it goes like this. One, notice how when they just won this major, they went out of their way to stress that Matt, as like an assistant coach, is very involved. He's involved with the team now. That Extaz even helped them during the major, and that they had their sports psych person. Now, the sports psych guy's gone, but you get the point there. They were always stressing the idea. It wasn't like we have Zonic, he's a genius, and he wants. Their whole thing was like, we have a whole team, and it's a whole system. So in that scenario, automatically, you're then going to imply that a piece can be taken out of that system. And like, essentially, their way of spinning it, Maniac, would be, unlike what I just said about how if Cadian leaves Heroic, that's like the end of Heroic. They would probably think it's not the end of Vitality if you let Zonic go. Yeah, maybe. And obviously now the rumour is Extaz just walks back into the lineup, their old guy who used to be the dude they had anyway, and spoiler, already worked with fucking Apex and ZWoo for years. So like, the problem is all that looks a bit too comfortable. So I could see how org people who aren't as in the game as much as me and you, I could see how they would think this will work out. On the Zonic side, I actually think it's madness. Like, I get it, but here's the problem. On a totally personal level, I can get it, Maniac. As a move, I think it's terrible. Like, I actually think essentially he's just gambled what I thought was like a really good chance to like run out his career and be undisputed best of all time. Like, he could have win a couple more majors and just shut all those convos down. Instead, now he's gambled it. But here's the personal reason why I can sort of vibe with it, though, Maniac. This is on some level why I left the Flashpoint project. This might be an interesting bit of behind the scenes for people, right? I always said when I was at that project that I had to believe it could one day be the best project. Otherwise, there's no point keeping doing it. Like, I'm not the sort of guy. I don't like Sisyphus shit, Maniac. I don't want to push a fucking boulder up a hill and then have it roll down again. So, like, I want to do it where it's like I'm accomplished something if I do that. So the problem was, in that project, you can imagine, even from the outside, it was very scoffed. A lot of the things I was promised, I was never given. A lot of the things that they said, eventually we'll get, the teams will sign the players, we'll get an organ. It was never happening. So when I remember telling people within the org, like people like Monty was, right, I personally believe as long as I'm here, I can still do my part to a high level. So as long as I'm in a situation that makes sense for me, I'll keep trying. But then essentially what happened, Maniac, was they came to me, and when we were going to like re-sign for the next year in my contract, they did the same thing. They came and they were essentially like, right, we want you to take a small pay cut. And it's not that like I was doing it for the money, but to me, what that signaled was, so that you're just telling me you don't value what I did then.
I get that.
So I just did all that, and you're saying essentially do it again next year, but we'll just pay you less. So in that scenario, it's like I'm already putting on myself everything. The reason why I give this analogy is because I think it's rare that there's a job that actually is comparable to coach. Because people don't know, for that job, I've told this story in the past, I essentially did like 3 people's jobs. I was doing creative director, I was doing all this narrative shit as a journalist, and then also I used to literally on the side be like a fucking unofficial GM trying to get players into teams. Like I probably sent like 100 100-player things of like, this guy can be signed for this, sign this guy. What about this player from your country? And none of them were ever doing it right. So essentially, the reason why I give this analogy is someone like Zonic, I've heard, is one of those coaches where he just lives the game, mate. Like when he's coaching a team, these really are those guys. You hear those stories about the football managers where, you know, like they wake up in the morning, they're thinking about the team. They're fucking a movie and they're really just thinking about, you know, how they're fucking, the winger should play on the, you know. Zonic seems like that sort of guy where he's invested his whole life into the game. He's got a family, if people don't know. In that scenario, if someone comes to you when you think you're doing your absolute best and you're the best in the world and says, take less money, it doesn't even matter if, like, you know, there, but the economics, it'll feel like a personal insult. It'll feel like someone saying to you, I actually don't think you're like that important. And in fact, I essentially think you're worth a bit less than I'm paying you. Like, even if you take into account everything, I can see how someone's ego could get hurt by that. Or it might just make you think then simultaneously, if someone comes along and goes, well, look, even though I don't have a team, I'll do the opposite. I'll pay you way more money and I'll give you all these results. Now that gets tempting now suddenly. Suddenly it gets attractive. Whereas to me, I feel like if Vitality had just said, here's the same contract again, sign, I think there's no problem. I think he's still there now and we're just running out Vitality. Because the other thing to spin it to, there's two angles on this Maniac. One, what do you actually think of Extaz going back to Vitality? Like, does this change any of the trajectory for Vitality? Do you still have them as number one if he joins?
That's a quick spin at the end. I wouldn't imagine Extaz would be a immediate downgrade, but I do think there is a little bit of a probation period with working international rosters and building relationships with Sphinx and Flames. That in itself is one thing. The other thing as well is, what does Magisk do in that? Because you have to imagine, this used to be a pre-Magisk Zonic package. We came into Vitality and obviously took a little bit of space in the balance of forces. Now that balance is going to go to hell. Magisk ends up as the only Dane here. Does he envision a future as well with this roster? There could be repercussions to that move that we haven't heard of currently. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But just on the Zonic topic to finish off, I just wanted to say, if this is what happened, and if Vitality really lowballed Zonic into making him think that we don't value you here, we can do it without you, and here is a shitty contract, and please sign it, then yeah, I would take it as an insult, and I would understand he packs his bags and leave. It's just complicated from a PR standpoint to talk about it, communicate on it. How do you communicate on it in a clean way? That's a bit more complicated. I only had a problem with the setting of an idea that something better is around the corner, because I don't think that's the case. Yeah, you just mentioned all of the issues about building a superstar team. I'm right there with you. I think there's levels and levels and levels of complication to actually build a super team, quote unquote. Just look at how long it took FaZe to have a final formula. They had about 20 players in that jersey, and I'm not even exaggerating.
For real, yeah.
It is a fact. So that's the only issue that I have. If Vitality really disrespected Zonic in any way, well, that's on them. Like, that is, because I think there's two ways to look at it, right? There is we are in a winter of esports and finances are a little bit dry. So please, Zonic, let's try to find a compromise. We're trying to make it work. This is the best we can do. We really value you. That's solution A. And solution B is, listen, we don't think you're that important, so here is the maximum we can do. And that is a completely different packaging of a similar situation, which is take a pay cut. And I don't know which one that was. If this was a disrespectful one, yeah, then if I'm Zonic and I actually have a very tentative offer coming on the side, yeah, you know what, screw this, I'm out. So I just wanted to add that on top. But when it comes to Extaz, it has a whole lot of shockwaves, I feel like, for the project. Number one, I think it strengthened Apex's position, because he has a very good relationship with Apex. They've worked together for years. He also has a pretty good vibe with ZywOo. They know each other very well, and I think he might be important. You also have to realize, under topic as well, is that we're going to go from CSGO to CSGO, from CSGO to CS2. What if ZywOo sucks at the beginning? What if he hates the game? What if the game doesn't speak to him? How does he handle going from being stratospheric, best player in the world, to actually being pedestrian for a little bit? How does he handle it? Like, what if he doesn't like the game? I think if I'm in charge of the Vitality project, I put someone specifically on that topic to make sure to help him transition. And how can we handle any kind of frustration coming out of it? What are the obstacles you're facing? What are the problems you have? Let's work on that. I think Extaz is very qualified to have that kind of support for ZywOo. But yeah, on the international side of things, he would have to prove to us that he can do something that he hasn't done before. Because if you remember, when he went to G2, that didn't end well. It was a very dry sort of month where he didn't feel like he had a whole lot of impact. He didn't really connect with the players. That didn't go so well. So that would be, he would have to prove to us that he can do that. And in such, there is a possible downgrade for the Vitality project.
Because on the topic of like what happens with Falcons, right? Here's the problem: is like I said earlier, right? That sounds on the surface like a really exciting premise, right? Like imagine that you get one of the best coaches ever, you have an international project, and you basically tell him. You've almost got like a blank check. You're like Man City in football. You just sign whoever you want. Like the jokes I'm making, like he's Pep Guardiola. Like just get whoever you want and we'll just win, right? That sounds awesome until you realise there's so many pitfalls involved in that. Because like I said, I'll actually use the example of the Cloud9 Henry G project because if people don't know, I was behind the scenes incredibly involved with that. Like I was talking to Henry the whole time and I was finding out who was on his list, who he was getting, who he wasn't. And in fact, if people want to know, I don't know if he ever revealed this himself, but I even wrote those little like things he did, those news posts where he announced each player with. If you ever go and look, it's in like very like poetic language of like how I describe like Woxic being a land monster or whatever, you know, it's pretty well done. It's actually one thing in the future I might do like copyright for people. But basically I knew actually quite intimately what was going on. And I can tell you that project was a fucking nightmare. And here's why. Even though you had the money, as I said, first of all, there's this insane like spinning plates thing where you can never get the players that you think you can. So for example, like you might want to get Nico, but Nico might only join if like Hunter and Zipnix join. And then you go to Hunter and you go, look, Nico's in if you join, and then Zipnix does. And then he goes, oh, okay, maybe I'm in. And then it's like Zipnix is like, yeah, but I'm not. So it's like, right, you go back, oh, well, I'm not in then. So now no one's in. But you thought for a minute you had one and then maybe two and then had two and if I get the third and then so actually you had nothing. So already you can see what a nightmare it is trying to get him in. And spoiler, the whole time you're doing this, you can imagine every one of those rumors is leaking out. Like that player's telling someone else who tells someone else. And then also, secondly, the worst thing that you have going for you is that everyone knows you have loads of money. It becomes like, there's a famous concept, I don't know if you know, Maniac, that one of the reasons why those Hollywood movies have insane budgets is because when someone who's in like a place where you want to hire a set or like do an action sequence hears that it's a Hollywood movie studio renting it, they like triple the prices is the joke that people say, or like, you know, magically everyone knows to like raise it through because you know they've got the budget for it. So spoiler, same thing. People might know the story. The real reason Essetag got the bag is because Zipnix like was demanding the bag. He was asking for like 40k a month. So in the end, like even though like that didn't happen, it's like they essentially paid like Essetag 35 a month or whatever the fuck. Like it's like essentially people knew, like gouged the fuck out of them when you well already the whole messaging around Falcons has been they've got millions and that's why so everyone's going to charge top dollar already, which means unfortunately between the two concepts that you have to sort of get a bunch of them at the same time and they're going to cost a lot of money, it just usually means like Cloud9, you're not going to get your dream lineup. And the worst thing is this, right, that I had to learn from that project is the worst thing you can do is aim for the stars and sort of like not quite make it. Because here's what happens. If I had to explain very briefly what happened with that roster, you'll realise how unfair that situation was. So remember, the initial 5-man roster that he signed was Alex as IGL, Woxic as Orpa, he had Floppy, if you remember, from the old Cloud9, he had Essetag, he couldn't get Zipnix, and then if you remember, he brought Mezzi, who was player with like, who was like the same agent as Alex, I think, or now Mezzi was the gamble, if people remember, who actually, by the way, ironically, was the one that worked out the best. He actually looked pretty good. Now, if you remember, that lineup wasn't that good, and it changed pretty quickly. Obviously, like in fucking the... What's his name? Guy, I can't remember his name now. What was the Zeppa came in, if you remember, instead of Woxic, because they had to kick Woxic, right? Here's the problem. When you look at that roster on paper, it's not even a bad roster. Like, Alex potentially was a world-class IGL. Woxic had actually been quite a dominant LAN AWP the previous year. So I've already got two of Thorin's main pieces set there. Then I have the Mezzi guy ended up working out as a sportive element. Floppy was sort of like your flames in vitality. You play, you're hoping develops and has some potential. And then Essetag's just a solid fill player. On paper, that roster doesn't sound that bad. That sounds like, hey, this, if like Woxic and Alex are really good, this actually is a pretty solid team. Maybe we can even be like a dark horse team. The problem you had, though, is any one of those pieces didn't work out. So in this case, the Woxic one didn't work out. Well, immediately you had no firepower then. It was like, that was my main star I signed. So all of a sudden now I am just overpaying Essetag to be a whatever support player on a team that can't do anything. So the problem goes like this. One, you're overpaying when you gamble. So you're not just gambling, you gamble at the highest stakes. And then secondly, the worst thing is like that. Notice that same lineup, Maniac. When I tell you that lineup, Alex, Woxic, imagine at the end, the fifth name was Zipnix. Dude, you get even more hype, wouldn't you? Be like, ooh, and he got Zipnix as well. But the problem is, just from not getting, in theory, one of my least important names, it fucked my whole squad. That's also what happens when you make these brand new, totally artificial international teams. Let's imagine, I'll give you an example, right? Let's imagine I did get Magus, because the rumours maybe he gets Magus, right? Let's say I get, you know what, fuck it. Let's say I get Monacy and Nico as well. already we're cooked. Look at those three. But then imagine the last two have to be like, insert random player from, I don't know, the German sea. You know what? Imagine the other two were just whatever names. All of a sudden, that's not as crazy a roster as it initially seemed like, and we all signed, but then suddenly it's like, who are you? You know, you're like essentially Esatag Mark II, or, you know, already that's not as sick. And then the other thing I'll throw in there as well is one thing I learned from that project and a lot of other projects. It's actually why I have incredible respect and why I started to think Carrigan was the GOAT IGL, is this Na'Vi squad proves this, mate. Trying to make teams from scratch is the hardest thing by definition, because at least if the core exists, I have a sense of how we can play. I have people who have that's the one thing I'll give the heroic guys. At least they have played together before. At least they know how each other plays. Like, if you're really trying to put together, in this case, it'd be in theory, potentially all 5 players might never have played together. You're starting literally with nothing. It doesn't matter how good the players even are. And the nothing you have, I mean, Navi's showing it right now. It could take you months to get going. And even then, when do you ever hit the ceiling? Like we didn't even talk about Navi, but the joke on the Navi one is they still haven't quite hit that ceiling. Like, they've gotten good now, but there's clearly still that 5th gear they can't get into. So I think it's an enormous gamble to start from zero, Maniac. Like, to me,
it is.
It's very different. Even if it's a lesser team, if you just sign like the core and then you add pieces, you know, then you bring this guy and this guy. I think to start from zero, it's the hardest possible thing you can do.
Yeah, and there are 2 more elements to that long list that you've already drawn out. First of all, look at Cloud9 and how they've struggled to make work what was on paper an incredible teams. Like the chemistry. Everyone always says, just having good pieces isn't enough. You have to have chemistry.
He means the current Cloud9, by the way, now, not the one I was talking about, obviously. Yes, the Russian one, yes.
The current Cloud9, exactly. Like, what guarantee of chemistry do you have when you create such an absolute recipe that's coming from all of the places? You have no idea. That's an incredible gamble to actually think that all of these individual great names will work together. Even if you were to manage, which is a big hypothesis, you were to manage to sign big 5 names in their respective roles, you in fact do not have any guarantee that it's going to work. You do not know if they want to play the same Counter-Strike. And if they want to, you don't know if it's actually going to work. In the execution, you don't know how they're going to handle any kind of differential between what they've hoped would happen and what is actually happening. You don't know how that's going to go. Are they a team that can communicate? Can they solve their issues? Can they see eye to eye? You have no idea about it. This is a huge gamble. And the other side of the coin as well, which I wanted to mention as well briefly, there is an attached risk to a unlimited black card, or whatever you called it. Like when you have a blank check and you can do whatever you want. There is a dark side to it. How do you know that you are getting players who actually truly believe in what you're doing? And how do you know if they are not just maybe being a little bit the song of the siren, like with the money and just, I mean, we're all human beings, right? This could be life-changing money. This could put me in a safe position. This could help me house my family. This could help me guarantee the future of my kids and all. How do you know that this is not overtaking their belief in what the project is going to put together? And this is completely human. That, I mean, if tomorrow someone calls me and says, listen, man, we have $60,000 for you. Do you want to coach? Do you think I'm just going to just say no immediately and close my phone? I'll be like, wait a minute.
You got to think about it at least, yeah.
What kind of change, what would that mean for my life? Like, where would I be in 2 years? I would, at the very least, consider, why would the players not have the same kind of thought, right? Yes. And so you might end up in a project where everyone individually kind of, okay, that makes sense for me. Let's do this for my life. It makes sense. But it makes it that much harder to think that an actual core is going to come together, like an actual team is going to come together with people that really believe, this is what we're doing now, this is going to work, this project is great, oh yeah, that player in that role, I want to play with you, I've always wanted to play with you for so many years, this is going to work. It's so hard to achieve when you have this